Let's get right down to business. Trayvon Martin, a 17-year-old unarmed African-American male, shot and killed by George Zimmerman, a 29-year-old Caucasian and Hispanic male claiming to be the captain of a local neighborhood watch in a Sanford, Florida gated community. This is a case that has sparked outrage with the majority of those familiar with it. Some area schools staging student walkouts, mass rallies and demonstrations across the nation, and as more and more of the facts are revealed, the outrage is understandable. On Sunday, February 26, 2012, Trayvon Martin left a dwelling he was staying in with his father, stepmother, and younger sibling during halftime of the NBA All-Star game he was watching that evening. At some point, shortly after returning to his housing complex, he was spotted by George Zimmerman, who found him to be suspicious looking and began to follow him. Zimmerman, while following Martin, called police emergency 911 to report the following.
Sanford Police Department, line is being recorded.
Hey, we've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy. It's Retrieview Circle. This guy looks like he's up to no good, or he's on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic?
He looks black.
Did you see what he was wearing?
George Zimmerman's self-defense serving claims about what happened just before he killed Trayvon Martin that night are not credible and inconsistent with established evidence and what we find to be highly credible witness accounts. George Zimmerman claims that after pursuing Trayvon Martin, even after police advised him against doing so, that he spontaneously gave up chase, and that while he was walking back to his car, it was Martin now, as the aggressor, who somehow managed to jump him from behind, break his nose, and repeatedly slam his head against the sidewalk, and now recently revealed by Zimmerman's father, threatened to kill him and went for his now exposed gun before Zimmerman managed to shoot him once in the chest. A lot of smoke and mirrors here, but the only thing legally relevant here are the key words, from behind. We have created a timeline using only the known facts and credible witness accounts to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was the aggressor from the beginning up until the point of contact, and thereby cannot mount a legally sufficient self-defense claim. You've had all the smoke and mirrors, and now here's where we're going to give you the smoking gun. But first, the timeline and some critical analysis. Zimmerman, who has since been dropped as a safety precaution, was actively enrolled in a college as a criminal justice major at the time of the shooting. In 2008, Zimmerman also completed a 14-week Citizens Police Academy training program offered by the Seminole Sheriff's Department. Zimmerman's attorney, Hal Uhrig, stated on record that the local community newspaper even lists George Zimmerman as a person to call upon seeing any suspicious activity. Evidence suggests that George Zimmerman may have been acting in some form of unauthorized law enforcement capacity. Now, I don't know what was on George Zimmerman's mind that night, but if that's the case, it appears to me that as a criminal justice major in some unauthorized law enforcement role, that he sounds like he's attempting to clear himself to shoot. As he states, he's coming towards me, and seconds later, he's got his hands in his waistband, and a few seconds later, he's got something in his hands. I don't know what this guy's deal is.
He's near the clubhouse right now?
Yeah, now he's coming towards me.
Okay.
He's got his hand in his waistband. And he's a black male.
Okay. How old would you say he
He's
was?
got a button on his shirt. Late teens.
Late teens, okay.
Something's wrong with him. Yeah. He's coming to check me out. He's got something in his hands. I don't know what his deal is.
That sounds like textbook defense strategy that we've all seen or read about numerous times. Sean Bell, Amadou Diallo, and countless others. If there's anyone out there who hasn't, I repeat, has not seen or heard of a case where police officers have gotten off from any criminal responsibility in wrongful death shootings with the he reached in his waistband or the he had something in his hands and it looked like a gun defense, please comment. But most of us have seen it. I've seen it, you've seen it, and Zimmerman, who's a criminal justice major, knew it. Was it a miracle that Trayvon Martin wasn't shot in those crucial moments where he was, as Zimmerman describes, checking Zimmerman out with his hand in his waistband and with something in his hands? Under Florida's controversial Stand Your Ground statutes, if Zimmerman would have shot Martin in the moments he was describing Martin in that manner, he may well have legally been able to defend himself against any criminal wrongdoing in such a shooting. Divine intervention or not, Martin may have saved his life at that point, where Zimmerman may have felt the right to shoot by running away from Zimmerman. We can confirm that, just as Zimmerman supposed that Martin was approaching him with his hands in his waistbands and with something in his hands, that Martin began to distance himself from Zimmerman by running or walking briskly away. Because Zimmerman himself states, these assholes, they always get away. You can hear breathing changes and you hear wind noises as air begins moving rapidly past the phone's tiny but sensitive microphone.
Right, just let me know if this guy does anything else.
Okay. They always get away. Down towards the entrance of the neighborhood.
Okay. Which entrance is that he's heading towards?
The back entrance.
The 911 operator clearly draws the same conclusions from the sounds, and he asks Zimmerman, "Sir, are you following him?" Zimmerman then replies in the affirmative, "Yeah," and is immediately advised by the 911 operator that, "Sir, we don't need you to do that." Zimmerman responds, "Okay," but the wind noises continue, and so does Zimmerman's pursuit.
Are you following him?
Yeah.
Okay, we don't need you to do that.
Okay.
Now, as a matter of legal record, this is the point where we can confirm George Zimmerman as a perceived threat to Martin, as evidenced by Martin's attempts to flee. Zimmerman, on the other hand, was at that time on the phone with a police 911 emergency operator. Zimmerman was armed with a 9mm machine pistol and was informed that authorized law enforcement was en route. He was, at that time and throughout this incident, the aggressor, as we can establish through evidence. At this point in our timeline, Zimmerman himself clearly states he ran.
All right, sir, what is your name?
George. He ran.
Towards the end of the tapes, Zimmerman is directed by the 911 operator to meet with responding officers by the mailboxes near the entrance of the complex. Zimmerman at first agrees, but then requests that responding officers call him upon their arrival and that he would at that time advise the officers of his location. These statements expose Zimmerman's intentions to continue his pursuit of Martin against the advice of 911 police emergency operators, and again outside the protection of any stand your ground or self-defense claims.
All right, George, we do have him on the way. Do you want to meet with the officer when they get out there?
Yeah.
All right, where are you going to meet with them at? Okay, do you live in the area?
Yeah.
Well, what's your apartment number? Okay, do you want to just meet with them right near the mailboxes then?
Yeah, that's fine.
Let them know to meet you with the out there, okay?
Actually, could you have him call me and I'll tell him where I'm at?
Okay, yeah, that's no problem.
Now, let's freeze our timeline, and when we come back, discuss some of the relevant underlying issues. There have been numerous reports fed to the media about Trayvon Martin, from his personal emails and Twitter accounts, as well as a MySpace account, all illegally hacked into. There's been mention of a current suspension from school, and an allegedly unrelated incident being in possession of female jewelry and unnamed burglars' tools. These issues and many others that have been raised and will continue to be raised are immaterial to what occurred between Zimmerman and Martin that evening. Here's where we discuss some of the more relevant issues in this case from the beginning. George Zimmerman and his captain of the local neighborhood watch claims, through a statement released by the NSA, or the National Sheriff's Association, the parent organization of USA On Watch, Neighborhood Watch, it has been revealed that Zimmerman was not a member of any group recognized by the organization. NSA Executive Director Aaron D. Kennard, a retired sheriff, said in a press statement, "The alleged action of a self-appointed neighborhood watchman last month in Sanford, Florida, significantly contradicts the principles of the Neighborhood Watch program. The NSA has no information indicating the community where the incident occurred has ever registered with the National Sheriff's Association Neighborhood Watch program." Another point for consideration: George Zimmerman does have a violent criminal history. The case could have been made that he has challenged the law before to the point of breaking it, where in 2005 he was arrested for interfering with an arrest of a friend. And according to the police report, Zimmerman briefly struggled with an officer incidental to that arrest. He was ordered to undergo anger management, and little else is known about this disposition. In another case, reportedly only a month later, Zimmerman was involved in a domestic violence dispute with the former fiancée, Veronica Zauser, and that case was settled with mutual restraining orders. Some on the right have attempted to classify this as immaterial as Trayvon Martin's emails and school suspension. We find it relevant, as this case is about violence, and George Zimmerman's criminal history indicates a propensity towards violence. And now, back to our timeline. Our next point, as we promised, is what we find to be the smoking gun, so to speak, of this case. As evidenced throughout this report, from the onset, George Zimmerman was clearly the aggressor. By his own admissions, he was pursuing Martin. Evidence confirms that he continued to do so, even after being advised against this by 911 police emergency operators. Upon being directed to meet police at the complex mailbox, he countered and instructed the 911 operators to have police call him upon their arrival, whereupon he would at that time advise them of his location, a clear implication of his intentions to continue his pursuit. By his own admissions, Martin was running away. George Zimmerman's suppositions, after displaying an almost fanatical drive to pursue Martin, even against the advice of 911 police emergency operators, that about the same time he very well could have been approaching Martin, that instead, spontaneously he abandoned his pursuit, that he simply decided to head back to his car, when it was Martin who, now as the aggressor, suddenly jumped out from behind, out of nowhere, breaking his nose, taking him down, straddling over him and banging his head on the concrete before Martin threatened to kill him and went for his now exposed gun. This is contrary to highly credible witness accounts. The smoking gun, in my estimation, is the 16-year-old girl's statements, who phone records confirm was on the phone with Martin at the time of the incident. This witness stated that Martin informed her that he was being followed.
He said his man was watching him, so he put his hoodie on.
And that she advised him to run. Martin is said to have replied that he was not going to run, but that he would walk fast. The witness also described the initial contact between Zimmerman and Martin to consist of Martin asking Zimmerman, "Why are you following me?" and hearing a voice, presumed now to be Zimmerman's, reply, "What are you doing around here?" before describing hearing what she imagines to be someone pushing Martin. The fact is that moments later, the call was terminated and Martin was shot dead by Zimmerman.
Trayvon said, what you following me from? And the man said, "What you doing around here?" Somebody pushed Trayvon because the head said this down.
Our smoking gun, an ear witness, highly credible testimony that corresponds perfectly with the timeline established by the 911 police emergency calls and George Zimmerman's own accounts that describes the moment of contact between Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, consisting of Trayvon Martin asking George Zimmerman, "Why are you following me?" and George Zimmerman replying with the question, "What are you doing around here?"
Trayvon said, what you following me for? And the man said, "What you doing around here?"
George Zimmerman's self-defense serving contention that he abruptly gave up his pursuit of Martin and was then walking back to his car when Martin suddenly jumped him from behind, again, is incredible but not credible. George Zimmerman will be arrested. The appropriate criminal charges will be reinstated. And George Zimmerman will not be able to present a credible or legally sufficient self-defense argument in this case. We believe the evidence, when examined, will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that George Zimmerman was the aggressor throughout this tragic incident and subsequently responsible for whatever injuries he may or may not have sustained as a result, as well as legally responsible for the unlawful killing of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin was unarmed and acting in accordance with the local laws and civil codes of the complex he was walking in. Trayvon Martin was even outside the criteria for a suspicious person according to the Neighborhood Watch guidelines. According to their statement, and I quote, "In Zimmerman's case, he would have recognized that Trayvon Martin was a non-suspicious part of the citizenry had he received proper training. The complex where he was killed in is middle class and mixed race." Now, I honestly believe the truth, whatever it may have been, would have been a better defense for George Zimmerman. Perhaps after encountering Martin, an unarmed youth who may have been in fear for his life, George Zimmerman found himself on the losing end of a confrontation that he brought upon himself, and in a panic he discharged his firearm. It was Martin who was the one threatened and may well have been essentially cornered, trying to protect his family, not wanting to lead a strange character to his doorstep, an unsuspecting loved one. Trayvon Martin may have simply stopped and stood his ground. Now, exactly what happened that evening is unknown, but in the end, an unarmed teen was shot and killed just a few yards away from his house. George Zimmerman was arrested that night for a homicide, but somehow that evening, after the county's top prosecutor and the city's chief of police conferred, all charges were dismissed, and George Zimmerman went home while Trayvon Martin went to the morgue. The question now comes into play. Did the Sanford Police Department, at the highest levels, along with the county's top prosecutor, intentionally curtail a homicide investigation? George Zimmerman's father is a retired magistrate. George Zimmerman's mother is a court clerk. George Zimmerman is a criminal justice major with aspirations to become a police officer. He completed a 14-week Citizens Police Academy training program offered by the Seminole Sheriff's Department. George Zimmerman is noted to have called 911 46 times over the last 6 years in his unsanctioned but lawful self-appointed Neighborhood Watch captain's position. Zimmerman was instrumental in forming this Neighborhood Watch and worked closely with the Sanford Police Department. Through this association, George Zimmerman was issued a permit to carry a concealed weapon, a fact that must have been known to police. These facts and others would make it fair to say that George Zimmerman, as the result of his associations, was well known by members of the Sanford Police Department. The first officers to respond were narcotics officers who would routinely patrol in and around the complex where the incident took place. These officers were more likely than not very familiar with George Zimmerman. It is reported very same first responding narcotics officers may have curtailed the investigation from the onset, mishandling and discouraging witnesses, even reportedly correcting a witness who said that they heard a boy scream by saying, "You didn't hear a boy scream, you mean you heard Zimmerman scream." A criminal background check and a test for illegal drugs was done on Martin's corpse, while Zimmerman wasn't tested at all. Zimmerman was also categorized by police as having a squeaky clean record, an inference that was mentioned as a factor in deciding that there would be insufficient evidence to prosecute this case. And this categorization is now known to be incorrect. Trayvon Martin's body was initially withheld from his family, listed as a John Doe, even though the identity may have already been established. With claims of a struggle, a broken nose, and severe injuries, Zimmerman's clothing wasn't sequestered. There's been no mention of photographs of Zimmerman's injuries, blood or grass stains, gunpowder residues, etc., all considered evidence that's meticulously collected and cataloged as standard operating procedure in similar cases. How much of this was done? Was the autopsy also curtailed? What will it tell us about the bullet trajectory, abrasions on the knuckles or knees of the deceased? I have no doubts that any evidence of this nature was properly noted, as these would confirm the one part of Zimmerman's testimony that is credible, and that is that he may have been on the losing end of a fisticuffs. The initial and lead homicide detective on the scene, Chris Sereno, 15 years experience, found Zimmerman's story insufficient and recommended manslaughter charges be filed against Zimmerman. But the state's top prosecutor, after conferring with the chief of police and unnamed others, demonstrated complete incompetence and abuse of discretion at best, and decided, according to the top prosecutor, that there was insufficient evidence to gain a conviction in the Zimmerman case. News on the News has obtained a copy of the original police report filed against Zimmerman with the charges listed as homicide, negligent manslaughter, and unnecessary killing to prevent an unlawful act. As we stated, there are new investigations being conducted. A special prosecutor has been named, and the Justice Department is holding a parallel investigation to determine not only what happened that night, but also looking into possible civil rights violation, as there is evidence to suggest that Zimmerman may have targeted Trayvon Martin based solely on his racial ethnicity. Whatever the case may be, if Zimmerman targeted Martin because of his race, was Zimmerman on the losing end of a confrontation? Those are all interesting media topics, but in a court of law, where this thing needs to be and should have been sent from the onset, all the evidence supports that Zimmerman was the initial aggressor, acting outside the advice of law enforcement, and the aggressor throughout. To all those on the right, the gun lobbyists, which I'm a supporter of gun rights and self-defense laws, the people who have gone on record to defend Zimmerman, and that you're right, this is America. I just have one question for you though. What about Trayvon Martin's rights? He was a 17-year-old boy, unarmed, minding his own business, running for his life at one point. To all those people complaining that there's been too much attention given to this case, saying that had this been a black-on-black crime, it wouldn't have made the news, I beg to differ. Firstly, I won't discuss impossibilities. It's ludicrous to let someone spin me into analyzing what if a whale walked on water, because it's impossible. And it's also impossible that a black man would have killed another black man in such a manner and not have been arrested and charged properly, with no fanfare, no police chief, no state attorney, and no cover-up. It's an impossibility. There's a tremendous difference in the comparison to any of the countless and many times horrendous crimes that Africans in America perpetrate against other Africans in America. In those crimes, the suspects are usually quickly apprehended and prosecuted to the fullest extent. In this instance, George Zimmerman was arrested and released for a homicide. There's no comparison. I won't entertain questions like that. It's just a tactic to divert the focus away from the relevant issues. There was and still remains probable cause for the arrest of George Zimmerman. He was taken away in handcuffs on a murder rap that night. This case should have been and will be presented to a grand jury. George Zimmerman will be brought before a court of law and stand trial. So another question for those on the right is, isn't that the American justice system? Isn't that what it's supposed to happen when there's allegations of a criminal act? There's no lynch mob and no calls for anything short of due process. So just what is it that you're opposed to? To all the warmongering right-wing Republican patriots and the racists who engage in every form of cultural terrorism, I suggest you drop the baseless, emotional, and incredible rhetoric and bring in some equally or more credible evidence, contrary to what the highly credible existing evidence now suggests. And that is that George Zimmerman is legally responsible for the unlawful killing of Trayvon Martin. God willing, we'll be back to wrap it up after this short break. In summation, an allegory if I may, this story, as a classical literary writing, complete with your requisite antagonist, protagonist, conflict, and resolution, George Zimmerman plays the role of antagonist to a T. The protagonist, Trayvon Martin, is deceased. This leads to the conflict, an unlawful murder in conjunction with the dereliction of duty or complete failure by the Sanford, Florida law enforcement apparatus to discharge its duties. The resolution is for all charges to be reinstated against George Zimmerman and for George Zimmerman to stand trial before an impartial jury of his peers, a competent prosecutor, and a fair impartial judge in a court having jurisdiction. And when the thorough investigation of the Sanford Police Department, the county's top prosecutor, and other officers' mishandling of the case. And at the conclusion of such, civil proceedings be initiated against anyone found responsible for Trayvon Martin's death and anyone involved in any cover-up or curtailment of the initial investigation. So now, there you have it, the facts from the fiction. And although I've seen some pretty good coverage on the issues, like MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell and Charles Blow on Zimmerman's proxy and so-called close friend, Joe Oliver, I also appreciated some of the commentary from Nancy Grace, who as a former homicide prosecutor herself holds the same position, that Zimmerman as the aggressor cannot mount a self-defense claim with any legal success. I even got some laughter out of Piers Morgan and my good friend Torres debacle on CNN. But most of the commentary, especially from the conservative right, has been nothing but smoke and mirrors. And tonight, we gave you the smoking gun. So, God willing, until the next time, it's Abdus Salam signing off for News on the News.